Welcome back to Jack and Rex Tales. The apartment was dark. Not the comfortable dark of a man sleeping peacefully, but the kind of dark a person builds deliberately. Blinds pulled, lights off, television flickering without sound, because even the noise of the world had started to feel like too much. Jack Thompson sat in his chair with a glass in his hand and the particular stillness of a man who had stopped expecting the evening to get any better. He was 50 years old, gray at the temples, shoulders still broad from 23 years of carrying things, equipment, responsibility, the weight of other men's lives. But his posture, in that chair, in that dark, told a different story. The story of a man who had quietly, without ceremony, stopped fighting his way back up. The glass was half full. He stared at it without drinking. That was the cruelest part of where he'd arrived. He didn't even want it anymore. He just didn't know what else to do with his hands. His phone rang. He let it ring twice, 3 times. Then something deep and involuntary, something the army had put in him so long ago it had become bone, made him answer. "Mr. Thompson?" The voice was professional, practiced, gentle in the way of people paid to deliver terrible news, gently. "I'm calling about your father. Colonel Robert Thompson passed away this morning. I'm sorry for your loss." Jack sat very still after the call ended. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried in years. He wasn't sure the machinery still worked. He sat in the blue flicker of the silent television and thought about a man he had spent most of his adult life trying to understand. A man built from pressed uniforms and careful silences, and a kind of love that apparently never learned how to leave his chest and enter the room. After a long while, Jack set the glass down on the side table. He didn't drink it. He didn't know why. He just didn't. It was the smallest decision he had ever made. It didn't feel like anything at the time. But it was the last night he spent in that apartment, and somewhere underneath the grief and the exhaustion and the quiet that surrounded him like deep water, something had shifted. Something old and stubborn and not quite dead. He just couldn't feel it yet. The lawyer's office smelled of leather and old paper. Daniel sat across from Jack in a suit that cost more than Jack's truck, silver watch catching the light, the easy composure of a man who had always known exactly how much he was worth. Claire sat beside him, composed, elegant, her grief arranged tastefully across her features like something chosen from a wardrobe. Jack wore the only collared shirt he owned. The will reading moved efficiently. Daniel received the investment portfolio, Claire received the properties and the accounts and the art collection their father had assembled over decades of disciplined, solitary living. Then the lawyer paused. "To my son, John Robert Thompson, I leave the property located at Route 9, Oak Haven, Montana, Thompson's service station, and my dog, Rex." 3 seconds of silence. Daniel made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Claire looked at Jack with something unreadable in her eyes. "A gas station?" Daniel said quietly. "In Montana?" Jack said nothing. He took the folder, folded it once, tucked it under his arm, and walked out. In the parking garage, he sat in his truck for a long time. He should have been angry. He told himself he was angry. But underneath the anger was something older and quieter. Because Jack Thompson had spent 23 years in uniform, and he knew what most people never learn, that what a man leaves behind is the truest thing he ever says. He just didn't know yet what his father had been trying to tell him. Rex was waiting at the shelter his father had arranged. A German shepherd, nearly 6 years old, coat the color of sable and deep shadow, thick and clean, eyes that were steady and dark and extraordinarily still. Not the anxious eyes of a dog desperate to be chosen, but the patient eyes of a creature that had already made its decision and was simply waiting for the other party to catch up. When Jack walked through the door, Rex didn't bark, didn't jump. He walked calmly across the floor, sat down directly in front of Jack, and looked up at him. Just looked. Jack stood there for a moment, then slowly lowered himself to one knee. He put his hand against the side of Rex's face. The dog leaned into it, not dramatically, not with the desperate relief of an animal starved for affection, just a steady, warm lean. "I know you. You're mine now. That's all." Something moved through Jack's chest, brief and nameless, gone before he could hold it. He cleared his throat and stood. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's go." They drove west for 2 days. Rex rode in the passenger seat with his chin resting on his paws, watching the land change from city to highway to open plain with the total tranquility of a dog who had never once in his life worried about the destination. Jack drove in silence mostly, stopping for gas and bad coffee and long rest-stop walks in the flat morning cold. Somewhere in South Dakota, with nothing but gray sky and grass in every direction, Jack looked over at Rex and said, without planning to, "I don't know what I'm doing." Rex turned and looked at him, held it for a moment, then turned back to the windshield. Jack almost smiled. It was the closest he'd come in a very long time. Thompson's service station sat on Route 9 just outside Oak Haven like something the modern world had driven past without stopping for so many years it had simply forgotten it was there. Peeling paint, rusted pumps, a sign hanging at an angle from one remaining chain, turning slowly in the wind off the plains. The office window filmed with dust, the garage padlocked. Jack sat in his truck looking at it for a full minute. Then he got out, put his boots on the gravel, and breathed in the cold Montana air. Something happened in his shoulders. A loosening. Small, almost imperceptible, but real. Jack jumped down beside him and stood looking at the station with his ears forward and his tail making one slow, deliberate movement. "Yeah," Jack said. "Me too." The first weeks were work and silence and Rex. Jack repaired and cleaned and patched and painted, his hands finding purpose in the physical honesty of restoration. Rex moved through the spaces around him like a second shadow, investigating, resting in doorways, always present, never demanding. On the 4th night, Jack found the whiskey. It was on the shelf behind the front counter, old label, half full. He stood looking at it the way a man looks at something that has hurt him before and will hurt him again, and somehow still calls to him across the years. He reached for it. Rex moved from across the room, not fast, not urgent, just purposeful, the way the dog did everything. He walked to Jack's side, sat, and placed his paw on Jack's forearm. Warm, heavy, steady. Jack stopped. He looked down at Rex. Rex looked up at him, and in the dog's eyes there was nothing complicated, no judgment, no fear, no performance, just presence, just the plain and powerful fact of "I am here, I see you, I am not leaving." Jack stood there in the cold dark of the gas station office with the dog's paw on his arm and felt something crack open in the middle of his chest, not break, not shatter, but open, like a window that had been painted shut for years, finally giving way. He put the bottle back. He turned off the light. He went to the back room and lay down on his cot, and Rex settled on the floor beside him, right beside him, close enough that Jack could feel the warmth, and the sound of the dog's slow breathing filled the quiet room like something holy. Jack stared at the ceiling in the dark. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't feel completely alone. He found the hatch 3 weeks later, working the garage floor with a chisel and pry bar, and what lay beneath it stopped him cold. The bunker was clean, cool, and alive with the soft blue glow of equipment that had never been switched off. Servers, maps, filing cabinets in his father's handwriting, decades of documented intelligence work hidden beneath a Montana gas station while the world drove past on Route 9 without a clue. And on the desk in the center of the room, a laptop, open, waiting. His father's face on the screen. Jack sat down. He pressed play. Colonel Robert Thompson appeared in his uniform, still and formal as always. His posture correct, even now, even here, even in this final private moment. But his eyes were different. The careful distance that Jack had grown up reading as coldness was gone. What remained underneath it, now that there was nothing left to protect, was something rawer and older and unmistakably human. Jack. His father's voice was steady, but the steadiness cost him something. You could hear the cost. If you're watching this, I'm already gone. And I need to say some things I should have said while I was standing in the same room as you. Jack didn't move. I know what you believed about me. A pause. His father looked down briefly, then back up. That duty mattered more to me than you did. That I chose this. He gestured slightly at the room around him. Over being your father. His jaw tightened. You weren't wrong, Jack. I made that choice more times than I can count, and I have lived with what it cost us both every single day. The old man was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. I found something, son. Something I couldn't take to anyone in my world, because everyone I might have trusted, Daniel and Claire, had already reached. He said his children's names the way a man says the names of wounds. It's all documented. The weapons network, the accounts, the names, everything is in this room. He straightened slightly, reflex. I couldn't give this to anyone but you, because you are the only one of my children who still knows what honor costs. Jack's hands were pressed flat on the desk. I failed you as a father. His father's voice broke, not dramatically, not with collapse, but with the specific quiet fracture of a man who has held something together for 50 years and is finally, in the last moment available to him, letting it go. I failed you as a father. His father's voice broke, not dramatically, not with collapse, but with the specific quiet fracture of a man who has held something together for 50 years and is finally, in the last moment available to him, letting it go. I am so sorry for that. I am more sorry for that than for anything. The video ended. The bunker was absolutely silent. Rex had come down the ladder without Jack hearing him and was pressed hard against Jack's leg, his whole warm weight leaning in, his head turned up toward Jack's face. Jack put his hand on the dog's back. He sat there in the blue light of his father's life, 30 years of solitary, secret, faithful work in a concrete room, and felt grief and gratitude arrive in the same breath, inseparable, the way they always are when love reveals itself too late and just barely in time. He bent forward over the desk and pressed his hand over his eyes. His shoulders shook once, twice. Rex pressed closer. Jack put his arm around the dog and held on in the silence of the bunker, and for a long time, neither of them moved. What followed moved in two rhythms, restoration by day, intelligence work by night. The station came back slowly to life. Agent Laura Reed arrived, using the coded phrase his father had left, assessed the bunker with quiet professional awe, and became Jack's partner in building the federal case. The people of Oak Haven began stopping in, cautiously at first, then with the easy regularity of people who recognize a neighbor. But Daniel and Claire had noticed the silence from Montana. The call came on a gray Thursday afternoon. Jack was outside when he realized Rex was gone. He turned, called once, heard nothing. His phone buzzed. "You've had long enough," Daniel said, smooth, controlled, the voice of a man who had never once doubted he held every advantage. "The dog is fine. He'll stay fine. You know what to do." Jack stood still in the cold afternoon for a long moment. Then he called Reed. The Hargrove sawmill was 3 miles out. Silver timber, collapsed roof, pale light falling through the gaps in long, cold columns. Jack walked in carrying a document case. Daniel stood in the center of the floor, Claire behind him, 2 men at the edges of the room. In the far corner, in a wire cage, Rex lay on his side. Jack saw him the moment he walked in and felt something happen in his chest that he had no name for. A swift, terrible contraction, the specific pain of seeing something you love reduced to helplessness. Rex's eyes were half open, his breathing slow and shallow from the sedative. But when Jack's footsteps crossed the floor toward him, the dog's tail moved. Once. Slowly. Just once. "You came. I knew you'd come." Jack stopped walking. He stood there for just a moment looking at that slow tail in the cage and felt the soldier return to him, not with anger, not with heat, but with the cold and absolute clarity of a man who has identified what matters and removed everything else. He turned to his brother. "I spent 23 years, Jack said quietly, alongside men who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, men who stood up anyway." He held Daniel's eyes. "You spent that same time selling weapons to people who used them against soldiers like the ones I served with." Daniel's composure flickered. "The documents, Jack." "Already submitted. 48 hours ago. Everything in that bunker. Every signature, every account." He set the case down. "I brought copies, in case you wanted to see your own names." What happened next was brief and decisive, the cold, trained precision of a soldier who had never actually stopped being one, and then Reed's team was through the doors, and it was over. Jack didn't watch his brother and sister be taken out. He was already across the floor, on his knees in the sawdust in front of the cage, his hands working the latch. "Hey," he said. "Hey, I've got you." Rex lifted his head, his eyes found Jack's face and held there, and his tail began to move, not weakly, not uncertainly, but with the slow and absolute conviction of a dog who had never for a single moment doubted this man would walk through that door. Jack opened the cage and gathered Rex against his chest. The dog pressed his face into Jack's neck and breathed. Long and slow and warm, and Jack closed his eyes and held on with both arms, and the sawdust was cold beneath his knees, and the light came through the broken roof in pale columns, and none of it mattered. None of it, except this. Jack pressed his face against Rex's neck. "I've got you," he said again, barely a sound. "I've got you, buddy. I've got you." His voice broke on the last word. He didn't try to stop it. Spring came to Oak Haven like a promise kept. The station stood clean and whole on Route 9. White paint, level sign, a small flag by the door, a coffee station visible through the window, and a board outside that read, in Jack's own handwriting, "Open to all, especially those who need a minute." Above the entrance, Thompson Veteran Rest Stop, fuel, coffee, and a place to breathe. The Ryan Thompson Foundation had paired 63 veterans with rescued service dogs by the time a reporter drove out from Billings. She found Jack outside in the new spring afternoon, Rex lying in the grass nearby, watching the plains with the deep and settled peace of a dog entirely at home in the world. She asked Jack what he wanted people to understand. Jack was quiet for a moment. "My father spent 30 years doing something important in a room where nobody could see him. I spent most of my life thinking he didn't care." He looked at Rex in the grass. "Turns out, he cared enough to trust me with everything that mattered to him." A pause. "I think about that a lot. How much love goes unsaid. How many fathers don't know how to open the door?" He picked up his brush. He found a way. Just took him until the end. That evening, Jack stood at the edge of the gravel lot, watching the sun go down over the Montana plains. The sky burned slowly, orange and deep gold and rose, enormous and unhurried, the kind of sky that makes a man feel exactly the right size. Rex sat pressed against his knee. Jack looked down at him for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, just to the dog, just to the evening, just to the wide-open Montana sky, "We made it, buddy." Rex looked up at him. His tail moved once, slow and certain. "Yes, we did." Real courage isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It looks like a man putting a bottle back on a shelf in the dark. It looks like opening a door in a floor that nobody else noticed. It looks like walking into a building to bring home the one living thing that never stopped believing in you. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it looks like a dog sitting down in front of you, resting a paw on your arm, and quietly refusing to let you give up. If that kind of loyalty still matters to you, if you believe that purpose can find a broken man, that a father's love can speak from beyond silence, that a good dog can save a life without making a sound, then you already know what this channel is about. Subscribe to Jack and Rex Tales. Every story is for the ones still standing. Every story is for the ones still trying to find their way home. We'll see you in the next one.